He hasn't touched a woman in 2 years, waiting for the nurse who saved. Dante Russo is a man who walks through violence like others walk through a hallway. But when Emma Sinclair finally appears in his private club, holding the ring he left her, his cold exterior shatters. She just wants a fake wedding date to spite her ex. He wants to claim her forever. From this moment, you are mine, he declares. And heaven help anyone who tries to make her feel small again. Let us set the scene. The wind howls through Tribeca, slicing right through Emma's thin coat. She stands frozen outside the heavy iron doors of the Obsidian Club, shaking. It is not the bitter November cold sinking into her bones. It is the terrifying weight of a small velvet box hidden in her pocket, and the dangerous name she is about to speak aloud. This fortress is built for the untouchable, fueled by dark money that buys pure silence. Stick with me as we unpack this story together. We are about to watch a 27-year-old nurse make the ultimate gamble. Sometimes, the bravest thing a shattered heart can do is walk willingly into the fire. Growth often demands we face our absolute deepest fears. Let us see if she survives the night. Emma crosses the threshold, and the atmosphere shifts instantly. The Obsidian Club breathes an aura of pure, unchecked power. Massive crystal chandeliers cast long shadows across the dark burgundy booths. The enforcers guarding the perimeter look like stone statues poured into tailored suits. In the dim amber glow, figures whisper over drinks that cost more than Emma earns during a brutal week at the hospital. Before she can catch her breath, a woman named Bianca blocks her path. She offers Emma a smile so perfectly polite it feels practically violent, calmly explaining that this sanctuary is for members only. Her eyes, however, remain completely hollow. Remember, the most dangerous traps in life are always disguised by the sweetest, most welcoming smiles. Emma swallows the fear in her throat and anchors her feet firmly to the floor. She tells the hostess she needs to see Dante Russo, revealing she holds something he desperately desires. The icy woman bristles, declaring the boss takes no unexpected guests. But here is where the dynamic flips. Emma slowly pulls the velvet box from her coat and snaps it open. Resting on the bruised silk is a massive platinum ring, scarred with a solitary letter. And for a fraction of a second, the hostess loses her breath. Her polished mask shatters into pieces. With a trembling finger, she summons a towering enforcer named Marco from the shadows. The lesson here is simple. Even the most terrifying giants must stop and listen when their unresolved past finally comes knocking at the door. She stands there, counting her own jagged heartbeats, just to keep from running back into the freezing night. At heartbeat 112, Marco returns. 5 minutes, he grunts. Emma follows the giant deep into the belly of the syndicate, twisting through blind corners deliberately built to disorient. Slowly, the thumping bass of the club fades, replaced by a suffocating silence. At the end of the hall stands a massive oak door, thick as a vault. Marco pushes it open. The room inside is swallowed by darkness, illuminated only by a window, framing the cold Manhattan skyline. Sitting behind a sprawling ebony desk is Dante Russo, quiet and still as carved stone. Sometimes, walking straight into our deepest fear is the only real way to discover how truly strong we are. Focus on this next detail. Barely visible in the dim light is a faded, scar tracing Dante's left temple. It is a violent memory Emma knows intimately, though the boss has no idea yet. Without a word, he pushes the velvet box across the desk and murmurs that her clock is ticking. Emma takes a deep breath and deliberately sits down in the heavy leather chair opposite him. It is a quiet rebellion, but right now, sheer defiance is her only armor. stripping away her pride. She confesses the Ugsiti. Her ex abandoned her for a wealthy heiress, and the wedding is in 2 weeks. She needs Dante to be her date. He slowly raises his head, studying her like a complex puzzle. Never let another person make you feel small just because they lacked the capacity to handle your love. Emma holds his unblinking stare. Without hesitation, she tells him he is no stranger to her. The shift into the room is terrifying. Dante's grey eyes sharp as shattered glass. He realizes she knows exactly what kind of monster he is. Emma simply nods, her voice steady. She understands the weight of his name, and she knows whose hand used to wear that ring. Dante rises from his chair with a fluid grace. He moves around the desk like a dark shadow sliding across the floor, completely silent and endlessly dangerous. Emma has to fight her deepest survival instincts just to remain glued to that chair. You and I both know how hard it is to hold our ground against pure intimidation. Slowly, he reaches out, plucking the silver band from the velvet. He turns the ring over and over, letting the city glow trace its edges. His voice drops into a lethal register as he demands to know exactly where she got it. Emma draws in a shaking breath. Every rehearsed lie vanishes the moment she meets his gaze. It is a harsh truth of life. Deception always burns away when you are forced to stand in the fire. She gives him the raw truth. She did not just find it. He left it hidden beneath a blood-stained hospital pillow in room 412 exactly 2 years ago. The silver band freezes in his palm. The touchable crime boss turns to solid stone. In that suffocating silence, you can almost feel the traumatic memories crashing down on him. The blinding white surgical lights, the desperate, shrieking alarms of a failing heart monitor. The agonizing past bleeds into the present. He remembers small, frantic hands pressing against his ruined chest. Hands slick with his own blood, stubbornly refusing to let him slip away. He hears that steady voice echoing above the medical chaos, begging him to stay awake. Dante blinks heavily, the cold executive suite returning to view. He stares at Emma, truly seeing her for the first time. She is the living reminder of those 3 bullet wounds. Looking right into his eyes, she tells him he was already gone, but she forcefully dragged him back to the living. Dante sets the ring down with the careful gentleness of a grieving man. The most profound life debts are often owed to complete strangers in the dark. 2 years, he whispers, his voice heavy with lingering ghosts. He tells her his men tore the city apart looking for her, but the hospital claimed she did not exist. Emma offers a weary smile. She admits she scrubbed her name from the records because she was absolutely terrified. When she tore open his shirt that night, she saw the sprawling Russo crest tattooed over his heart. Dante speaks softly, the realization sinking in. She knew what kind of monster he was and chose to save him anyway. Emma simply replies that her duty is to heal, regardless of the patient's sins. True compassion requires choosing humanity, even when every instinct tells you to run. Dante slowly closes the distance between them. His eyes are a stormy gray, holding dangerous secrets. In a voice barely above a whisper, he confesses the silver ring belonged to his late mother. It was the only memory of his mother he managed to keep safe. He left it beside her that night as an eternal blood debt, a silent vow that if the dark ever came for her, he would act as her shield. Emma does not blink. She looks up at this king of the underworld and boldly calls the debt due. A flicker of genuine shock ripples across Dante's face. He asks if she is truly trading a priceless heirloom for an evening of pretend romance. She calmly replies that the value of a thing is not found in its price, but in its purpose. He remains completely silent. Then, his tone drops to a cruel whisper. He asks if she even knows the real reason her ex abandoned her. Emma's blood runs cold, terrified that this powerful man knows her private pain. In this world, secrets are a heavy currency, and he holds all the coins. He watches her, weighing her heartbreak like diamonds on a scale. He asks if she merely wants him to play the role of a devoted lover. Emma pours her soul out. She just wants to walk into that wedding hall without falling apart. She wants the man who broke her to look at her and feel the heavy weight of regret. Deep pain often demands an audience, and you and I have both wanted to make our betrayers ache. Dante goes completely still. When he finally speaks, the mob boss is replaced by something much more profound. He agrees to her terms. He slides the velvet box back toward her shaking hands. "Keep it," he murmurs. He promises to teach her a lesson far sharper than simple, petty revenge. Emma stares at the silver ring, paralyzed by the dangerous door she has just opened. Emma whispers that she does not understand. Dante turns his back, gazing out at the ink-black river carving through the glowing city. He decides to give her the truth. She gave him his life that night, and now he owes her a new one in return. Escorting her to a foolish wedding is a cheap insult to the miracle she performed. Emma quietly asks him what he truly wants from her. As he turns back, the shadows catch the pale scar near his temple. For a fleeting second, the dying man on the bed merges with the ruthless titan standing before her. True healing never comes without a heavy sacrifice. Dante calmly lays down his strict terms. He wants 2 full weeks. She moves into his secure penthouse. He vows he will not just teach her how to wear a brave mask for a coward. He is going to teach her exactly how to burn his world down. Dante leans into the shadows, telling Miss Sinclair he will teach her how to be truly unbreakable. When his blood was spilling onto those cold tiles, his life slipping into the dark, she was the only one who looked into his fading eyes and said he was worth saving. Listen to me, because we both need to remember this. Never underestimate the quiet power of telling a discarded soul they matter. Nobody had ever given Dante that grace. Now, he's going to return it. Her former lover made her feel like nothing, and Dante plans to crush that lie entirely. Emma stares at the floor, swallowing a heavy tide of tears. But then, Dante's tone turns to absolute ice. He warns her that her ex is a senator's son. If a known kingpin walks into a political wedding, it will ignite a vicious war with the government. Dante admits that fighting politicians is a line he has fiercely avoided crossing during his 15 years ruling the underworld. Emma, always carrying a gentle heart, softly whispers that he should just walk away. But Dante is entirely locked in. He tells her he has no choice. If he ignores the debt of his own life, he betrays the only good things his mother ever taught him. The Russo family bleeds for one single law: honor before everything. In this quiet moment, he places his absolute honor right into her hands. Emma physically trembles. It is no longer fear creeping down her spine. It is the crushing weight of actually meaning something to a monster the entire city dreads. Her memory drifts back to that hospital room, her hands covered in his blood, begging him not to die. The universe has a strange way of flipping the board. Let me paint this picture for you. Emma is quietly pushing painkillers into the veins of a ruthless kingpin named Dante. He strictly forbids her from calling the police. She agrees to give him 2 weeks of her time, but refuses to abandon her patients. Dante gives a slow, heavy nod, promising to surround her with his top soldiers, but the shadow deepens. He warns her that the second the streets know they are connected, she becomes a walking target for his rival, Salvatore Bianchi. His enemies will hunt down anyone innocent just to watch him bleed. Emma is shaking with terror, yet she still nods, Dante extends his battered hand across the table to seal their fate. Here is a truth you can hold on to. Real courage is not the absence of fear. It is being completely terrified, yet still reaching out to shake the hand of the devil. Dante stares straight into her soul and asks if they have a deal. Emma looks down at his scarred hand. It is the exact same hand she held 2 years ago when his pulse was fading away beneath her fingers. She reaches out and grips it. But Dante does not just let go. He holds on for one agonizing second longer, his thumb slowly tracing her knuckles. He tells her he is not just repaying a debt. He is claiming her for the next 14 days. He swears that no one will touch her, no one will frighten her, and absolutely no one will ever make her feel small again. Emma is deafened by the violent drumming of her own heart. She barely manages a nod. Dante simply tells her a car will arrive at 6 in the morning, and then he turns away. That is the quiet, unspoken gravity of a man who completely owns his world. Emma stands up, her knees trembling so hard they might give out, clutching a velvet box. She steps into the dim hallway, carrying the heavy realization that her old life is over. By 5:45 the next morning, a sleek black Mercedes pulls up to her crumbling apartment in Queens. It looks absurd, parked next to a rusted Honda and leaking garbage. It is like leaving a flawless diamond on a filthy sidewalk. Emma locks her door, exhausted after a sleepless night. Before she hits the pavement, the driver steps out. He is a massive, dark-haired man built like a brick wall, yet carrying a chilling, trained politeness. He introduces himself as Luca. Pay attention to the quiet enforcers, my friends. The men who speak the softest are usually the ones carrying the heaviest sins when the boss is out of sight. You look at an enforcer like Luca, and you would never guess the torment tearing him apart. There will come a day when Luca stands in the dark, the steel of his gun trembling violently in his grip. The biggest enemy of his life, the man who ordered the hit on his bloodline, would turn out to be the exact same father figure who tucked him in during those stormy nights in the gutter. That kind of profound betrayal shatters a soul. But today, Luca simply states he will be guarding her, opening the car door in silence. They glide over the bridge as the sun hits the river. Emma sits in the back, breathing in the scent of power. For the first time, she stops feeling like a ghost in her own life. Stepping out of the elevator, she walks into a brutal monument to absolute dominance. This penthouse is beautiful, but terrifying. 3 massive floors carved out of glass, steel, and endless black marble. It is so brutally empty that the air feels freezing, as if the walls were designed to swallow human emotion whole. Out of the shadows steps a silver-haired woman at the base of a floating staircase. Her posture is strict, like a hardened general commanding a war room. She introduces herself as Giovanna, the keeper of this sky fortress. Emma follows her up the cold steps, passing a living area where a single priceless painting hangs alone on an enormous wall, breathing in total silence. Giovanna opens the doors to a guest suite that completely dwarfs Emma's old life. The space drips with quiet, unlimited privilege. Life lesson right here. When you bleed to save someone else, the universe has a funny way of paying you back with heavy interest. The adjoining bathroom is sculpted from pale stone, a silent temple of luxury. Beyond it, a closet overflows with silk in deep colors Emma would never have dared to touch. Giovanna casually mentions the garments will fit perfectly, as Mr. Russo acquired her measurements while she slept in the car. Emma freezes, a spike of confusion hitting her chest as she asks how that is possible. Giovanna flashes a thin, wicked smile and dryly claims Dante is just a phenomenal guesser. A startled laugh escapes Emma's throat. It is the first real sound of joy she has made since Harrison crushed her soul. Suddenly, a deep voice shatters the moment. Dante stands in the doorway, draped in black and charcoal, exuding the dark energy of a man who dictates fate before the sun even rises. He does not smile. He merely states that breakfast will be served at 7 sharp. Emma stares at him, wondering out loud if he always rises before the dawn. Dante's gaze is flat. He admits he survives on 4 hours of sleep, calling it a hazard of the trade. Now, you and I need to pay close attention because everything shifts here. At 7 on the dot, Emma enters a kitchen centered around a cold slab of white marble. A phantom chef leaves behind rich Italian espresso before melting into the shadows. Dante lowers his newspaper. His eyes lock onto hers as he demands every single detail about Harrison Whitmore. Emma's hand shakes as she lifts her cup. She explains the illusion of their romance. 2 years dating, 1 year engaged to a man she thought was perfect. When Dante asks why she was discarded, Emma confesses the bitter truth. Harrison traded her love for a wealthy heiress, a calculated move to secure his father's political throne. Dante sees right through that hollow excuse. He leans forward and demands the ugly truth. Emma drops her gaze, the old wounds tearing wide open in her chest. She softly explains that just days before the end, at a crowded charity gala, Harrison drank too much. Standing before hundreds of elite snobs, the man she loved began to laugh at her. Her voice fractures. Harrison publicly mocked her devotion, loudly bragging that he was dodging a bullet by refusing to marry a nurse beneath his status. The knife twisted deeper. The entire ballroom laughed. Even her own mother chuckled, desperate to hide her deep social shame. Across the marble counter, Dante's calm eyes suddenly swallow the light, turning dangerously pitch black. Hear this clearly. Never manipulate the quiet hands that held your world together. Keeps every ledger, and its collection day is always brutal. It gets darker. Harrison actually mailed her an invitation to his new wedding, adding the word guest to her name as a cruel joke. At that confession, Dante slammed his heavy hands flat onto the marble island. You can see the violent restraint vibrating in his shoulders, fighting the urge to shatter the room. He softly commands her to finish her food, saying they have work but to begin. When Emma nervously asks what they are starting, Dante locks onto her soul. She witnesses the terrifying, cold-blooded promise buried in his stare. He tells her, without a shred of mercy, that he is going to mold her into Harrison Whitmore's worst living nightmare. We are stepping into the ultimate reckoning here. After coffee, Dante guides her down those floating steps to a hidden lower level. A massive room of mirrored walls and oak flooring. An empty stage waiting for a tragedy to unfold. Tonight, you and I are watching a shattered soul learn to take up space again. Emma stands in a private studio, a collision of a gritty boxing gym and a polished dance hall. Dante gives a single command: walk across the floor. As she steps, the invisible weight of her trauma presses down her older she always inward. Her eyes lock onto the floorboards, terrified of being seen. Dante stops her cold. He tells her she is walking like a ghost, apologizing just for breathing. She wants to argue, but the denial catches in her throat. He points to her tucked chin, the physical marker of a woman convinced she does not belong. She closes her eyes, swallowing the bitter truth. Never shrink your spirit to make a careless room comfortable. Claiming your own space is the first real step to survival. A cold realization hits Emma. She has carried this defensive posture her entire life, wearing it down hospital corridors and into every room her arrogant ex tried to dominate. Dante steps quietly behind her. She feels his heat, yet he intentionally holds back. He murmurs he will never touch her without permission, asking if he can adjust her stance. She gives a trembling nod. His rough palms settle onto her shoulders, pulling them back firmly to open her chest. A single calloused finger rests beneath her chin, lifting her gaze just 1 inch. Suddenly, air rushes into her lungs. It is a tiny physical shift, but the mental release is staggering. She is learning to carry her own weight. True healing often begins with the simplest courage, the bravery to stand tall and look the world directly in the eye. The silence in the studio stretches out, heavy with unspoken grief. Dante leans in a fraction, his breath brushing the back of her neck. His voice drops to a rough whisper. Cutting cleanly through her rising panic, he tells her that this body belongs entirely to her and never to the cruel men who spent years trying to shrink her down. Her pulse hammers wildly against her throat, a frantic rhythm of old fear and newly awakened hope. For the very first time, the crushing chains of her past begin to fracture. She closes her eyes, letting his quiet, dangerous strength anchor her drifting soul. No matter how deeply you have been scarred by those who broke you, your spirit remains your own private sanctuary. It is always waiting patiently for you to take back the iron keys. 3 long hours bleed away, leaving Emma exhausted. Every muscle aches, but Dante refuses to let her break form. He paces the floor like a restless shadow, breaking down the psychology of power. He tells her to slow her pace. A queen makes the world wait. If a stranger stares, she must lock eyes until they look away first. By noon, the brutal session ends. Emma collapses onto the floor, downing a glass of juice like a wanderer finding water. Then she asks the question tearing at her mind. Why is a feared underworld boss wasting his time on a ruined nurse when he could easily settle his life debt with cash? Dante sits across from her, his dark eyes entirely unbothered. The most profound debts we owe in this brief life are always the ones that paper currency can never truly satisfy. For a fleeting second, the cold mask of the boss slips, revealing the wounded man underneath. Dante confesses a terrifying truth. He woke to find her asleep by his bed, and his first instinct was to end her life. Her knowledge made her a fatal liability. A violent shiver through Emma as death brushes her memory. But his voice softens. He brings up the rushed medical note she left behind. The final line had pierced his iron armor. Please live. Somebody is waiting for you to come home. Emma nervously brushes it off. Whispering, she writes that for every patient. Dante leans forward, the silent sorrow in his eyes heavy enough to drown in. I am not every patient, he murmurs. True empathy is a blinding light, easily capable of disting the most dangerous monsters hiding in the dark. Stick with me here, because this is where grief transforms into absolute power. Emma is entirely orphaned in this cold city. Her parents are buried, and she has no one to call when the night gets too dark. Without warning, Dante gently covers her trembling fingers. He confesses he left his heavy signet ring with her for one specific reason, so she could call him home when she needed saving. By the 3rd day, his penthouse becomes a psychological battlefield. Dante turns the dining room into an intimidating maze of fine crystal and silver she cannot decipher. A severe, unknown older woman sits across the table waiting to strike. Remember this quiet truth. The fierce family you choose to build out of your own ruins is often much stronger than the fragile bloodline you lost along the way. Enter Signora Castellano, a regal woman with voice and silver hair. She glides across the marble like she rules the old world. Dante calls her a family consultant, a polite title, masking a terrifying enforcer. Tonight she is playing a specific role. She acts as Emma's former abuser, the toxic mother of her ex. She strikes immediately, using a sickeningly sweet voice to mock Emma's fractured life. The invisible claws of panic grip Emma's throat. Her trauma begs her to shrink, to apologize for breathing. Her mind flashes back to Harrison's cruel laughter echoing in a hollow ballroom. The emotional agony is suffocating, but surrender is no longer an option. You cannot let the ghosts of your past dictate the architecture of your future. To survive the fire, you must fiercely reclaim your own ashes. Suddenly, the terrified girl vanishes. Emma inhales, lifting her chin to meet the older woman's predatory stare. Drawing on an unfamiliar strength, she fires back with freezing venom. She smiles softly, thanking the woman for her hollow concern, declaring her survival comes first. It is a stunning display of newly forged armor. In the shadows, Dante catches her eye, offering a fiercely proud nod. Days ago, she would have missed it entirely, but today, that quiet approval anchors her soul. The sonora prepares another strike, but a harsh buzzing shatters the tension. Dante's phone vibrates against the marble. He glances at the screen, and the room's temperature plummets to freezing. True confidence is a heavy blade. Once forged in the fire, no one can ever disarm you. Dante does not just react. He shifts instantly into the terrifying stillness of an apex predator. He steps onto the terrace, blocking the glowing city skyline. The glass door remains cracked. Emma sits frozen, watching him pace like a cornered wolf, firing off violent Italian into the phone. Through the wind, 3 chilling words reach her ears. Bianchi. Murder. When he steps back inside, his features carved from absolute ice. When she asks what is wrong, he attempts to shield her with a hollow lie, murmuring she should not worry. But the fearful Emma is gone. She stands up, her voice trembling but unbroken, reminding him her life was put on the line the night she saved him. Boundaries require courage to enforce. If you are forced to bleed in the war, you deserve to know exactly who is holding the knife. You might be wondering the same thing I did. How does the bitter past always find? Dante stares her down before releasing an exhausted breath, revealing the crushing truth. Salvatore Bianchi, his most vicious rival, is hosting a secret meeting at the Plaza Hotel. The guest of honor is Senator Whitmore, the father of the man who broke Emma's spirit. All blood instantly drains from her face. Dante explains the lethal math. If Bianchi buys the senator's loyalty, he gains the power of the federal government. He could erase Dante's syndicate without firing a weapon. For suffocating panic wraps around Emma's ribs. This is not random luck. This is an orchestrated nightmare. Sometimes the universe drags your deepest traumas back into the glaring light, simply to force you to pick up the heavy sword and fight back. The horrifying reality crashes over Emma. If she walks into the Whitmore wedding on Dante's arm, her former tormentors will recognize. They will weaponize her trauma, knowing she is the feared boss's only vulnerability. Trembling, she tries to surrender. She begs Dante to abandon the plan, refusing to spark a bloody gang war over her shattered heart. But Dante will not accept her retreat. In 3 strides, he crosses the floor, his large hands gripping her shaking fingers. His dark eyes lock onto her frightened soul. He tells her he's watched a transformer be bleeding ghost into an unyielding queen. He forbids her from letting old terrors clip her wings again. Never allow the paralyzing fear of an unseen tomorrow to strip you of the closure and respect you have bled so heavily to finally earn. Guilt gnaws at Emma, but Dante extinguishes her panic with a terrifying calm. He tells her the war is not approaching. It is already breathing down their necks. The ruthless syndicate bosser then cracks open his own armor. Having one to shield does not make his hands shake, he confesses. It hones its blade to a razor edge. Emma searches his dark eyes for a lie, finding only an unyielding devotion. He promises her abuser will never wash away the shadow they are about to cast over his wedding. What we witness next is a brutal rebirth. Emma is forged in a furnace, learning to conquer the rooms that once made her feel invisible. Finding a righteous purpose does not merely bandage a bleeding wound. It transforms your fragile spirit into something bulletproof. Let us examine this transformation together. By the fourth day, Dante brings in Celine, a vicious stylist who circles Emma with the calculating stare of a hawk. She murmurs that the exhausted nurse hides the bone structure of royalty. Soon, the penthouse is buried under garments worth more than 10 years of hospital paychecks. Emma wades through luxury, slipping into silks that feel like cold water against her bare skin. Celine plays the merciless judge, tossing aside emerald fabrics with an impatient flick of her wrist. Finally, she reveals a breathtaking gown, the exact shade of fresh blood. Never let anyone convince you that rebuilding your exterior is a shallow distraction. When your spirit is battered, choosing to wear the right armor is what turns the tide of the war. The burgundy dress is not just for fabric, it is a calculated weapon. The silk cascades like heavy water, daringly split down the leg and entirely exposed in the back. Emma stares into the mirror, unable to recognize the quiet powerhouse staring back at her. Dance stands perfectly still in the doorway, consumersignet eyes her in total sauce. Finally, his gravelly voice fractures the quiet. "That is the one," he murmurs, promising her ex will completely forget how to breathe. By the fifth day, they transition into the psychology of movement. Dante pulls her across his private studio, teaching her the precise steps of the waltz under heavy shadows. It reminds us of a grounded truth. Real transformation is an exhausting ritual. You must do the agonizing work behind closed doors before you can ever demand to hold the spotlight. Look closely at the psychological tension in this quiet room. Dante plants his heavy hand against her lower back, anchoring her like a man shielding his world from a hurricane. As he spins her, his tone turns deadly serious. He warns her that Harrison will try to cut in, and she must learn to freeze him out. Emma frowns, wondering why the man who discarded her would even try. Dante breaks down the dark mechanics of the male ego. Toxic men cannot endure watching another man worship the prize they carelessly threw into the dirt. By the sixth day, Emma returns to her exhausting hospital shift, with the massive Luca standing like a stone sentinel outside the doors. The lesson hiding here is impossible to ignore. Never let someone attempt to reclaim your heart simply because you found the courage to elevate your life. 3 a.m, Hush hospital lights buzz as a co-worker notices the mountain of a bodyguard near the doors. Emma flashes a cool smirk and casually dismisses him as just a friend. A masterful display of control. By the 7th day, Dante pushes her limits at an exclusive mission restaurant. She commands the room flawlessly, ordering vintage wine and demanding respect. But the energy shifts inside the dark, armored car. Heading home, Dante drops a heavy reality on her lap. He murmurs she is only 60% ready because she secretly feels like she is playing dress-up. From the shadows, he softly asks about her family roots. It brings us to absolute truth. Pretending only gets your foot in the door. Genuine power demands that you actually believe you belong in the room. The polished armor finally cracks. In the quiet of the car, Emma spills her guarded heart to the boss. She speaks of her mother, the grief of losing her father, and bleeding herself dry on double shifts to put her brother through medical school. Dante listens, asking if her brother knows about the man who broke her. Emma admits her brother wanted to fly out just to shatter her ex's jaw, Dante nods with profound respect, labeling him a real man. As the car idles outside, Dante stops her from leaving. His dark eyes lock onto hers, heavy with memory. He brings up the night they met, right before his deadly surgery, and demands to know what she whispered. Here is the quiet beauty of life. The smallest acts of compassion can completely rewrite your destiny without you ever knowing it. Emma flushes a fierce red, finally confessing the secret she whispered that night. She begged his bleeding body not to give up, simply because the world was in dire need of more handsome men. She thought he was completely unconscious. Instead, Dante rewards her with a rare, devastating smile. He admits he heard every single syllable. He chose to claw his way back from the edge of the grave just so he could track her down one day. What a powerful confession. The 8th day drags her back into brutal reality. She suffers through another 12-hour shift, fighting for lives while bracing for a bloody syndicate war. Walking out at dawn, she smells of harsh antiseptic and exhaustion. True heroes never sit around waiting for a magical savior. They step out into the freezing cold and do the heavy lifting themselves. You can feel the danger bleeding into this scene. Luca idles in the black SUV, but the heavy interior is suffocating Emma. She taps the bulletproof glass, telling the giant she needs to breathe city air, but slowly trails her along the curb. The Manhattan mist is impossibly thick tonight. It swallows the harsh noise of traffic, wrapping the streets in a lonely silver fog. For one stolen minute, Emma closes her eyes and pretends she is just a normal woman living a quiet life. But peace is always a fragile illusion. Without warning, a tall silhouette steps right out of the blinding fog, completely blocking her path. It is a painful lesson we all eventually face. The exact second you drop your heavy armor is precisely when your toxic part comes crawling back to hunt you. The heavy fog parts to reveal Harasusan, looking exactly like the entitled villain he is. Nay, draped in a wool coat, he flashes an empty smile holding zero warmth. He tries to play his appearance off as a coincidence, but Emma is done playing the victim. She coldly calls him out for stalking her. Harrison pivots to playing the worried savior, claiming he is only there because Dante Russo is a dangerous criminal. He steps uncomfortably close, reeking of expensive cologne, attempting to physically intimidate her. But Emma refuses to flinch. She stares into his cold eyes and tells him the feared boss has shown her far more genuine kindness than he ever did. Harrison lets out a dry, cruel laugh. Sometimes the deadliest poison we swallow is the exact voice we once mistook for true love. Consider the nerve of this man. Harrison calls her naive, mocking the idea that a king like Dante could ever care for a hospital worker. He spits the word nurse like poison, desperately trying to drag her back into that old box of humiliation, and the old Emma would have crumbled. But not tonight. Her new instincts kick in. She pulls her spine perfectly straight, channeling the icy calm Dante taught her, and stares Harrison right in the face. She completely flips the power dynamic. Her voice is dead quiet as she tells him she can smell the pathetic fear sweating off his skin. Why is he creeping in the fog when he already has his wealthy new bride and a promised Senate seat? The moment you finally recognize your own worth, the toxic ghosts of your past instantly lose all power to break you. She dismantles him right there in the mist. She asks why he is creeping around at dawn just to watch her. Harrison flinches. Emma realizes he is spiraling because the woman he threw away is now protected by a man he is too terrified to cross. She delivers the crushing blow, stating that respect from a real man means more than the fake love of a little boy. Harrison snaps, violently grabbing her arm. Before she can blink, Luca materializes from the fog like a ghost. His hand is already inside his coat, fingers wrapped around cold steel. He softly orders Harrison to step back. The coward instantly retreats, pathetically screaming about his father being a United States Senator. Loud titles and inherited money mean absolutely nothing when standing face to face with real consequence. Luca smirks, his voice flat, telling Harrison he could not care less who his father is. Harrison shoots Emma a venomous glare, warning her not to attend his wedding on Dante's arm before melting into the fog. The ride to the penthouse is silent. Emma is trembling. When the elevator doors part, Dante is waiting in the dark foyer. He looks lethal, his jaw tight enough to shatter glass. He watched Wade end the straight cameras, and his rage over Harrison grabbing her is terrifying. Emma tries to play it tough, but Dante coldly declares Harrison's just made the biggest mistake of his life. He pulls his phone, barking rapid Italian, ordering his men to unearth every dark secret buried by the Whitmore and Bianchi families. True protection is never about empty promises. It is about swift, absolute action. The pieces finally lock together, revealing a reality cold enough to freeze blood. Dante knows a weak man like Harrison could never muster this audacity without the Bianchi indiction spelling impulsjumsingnaces. He warns Emma her glittering upcoming wedding is merely a beautifully decorated snare. Hours later, the Obsidian Club shuts down. The music stops, and the inner circle gathers in a secret room steeped in heavy amber shadows. Marco and Luca wait, but the real shark sits quietly in the corner. Senora Castellano. Emma realizes this gentle etiquette teacher is the ruthless architect behind 40 years of mob operations. It leaves us with an undeniable truth. Never underestimate the quiet, unassuming souls sitting silently in the room, because they are often the ones holding the power. Let us look closely here, because the tension in this room is suffocating. A new figure named Enzo sits at the table, wearing wire glasses and radiating a cold, calculating energy. Dante introduces him as the head of intelligence. Enzo does not blink at Emma before the slamming surveillance photos onto the oak table, exposing a highly secret meeting. In the grainy images are the rival Bob Bianchi, a corrupt senator, and Harrison. Emma stares in pure shock at her ex sipping scotch across from a known killer. Bianchi is offering Fuse $20 million in his blood money to fund Harrison's new political campaign. It proves a miserable but consistent fact of human nature. Blind, unchecked ambition will always push a desperately weak man to sell his soul to the highest bidder. As you and I know, dirty money always carries a bitter price. Politicians are bought to shield the Bianchi syndicate. Dante senses the shadows thickening, quietly ordering Enzo to reveal the rest. Enzo delivers a shattering blow. Bianchi wants Dante erased from this earth entirely. He expects Harrison to weaponize the government against him, or simply pull the trigger himself. Emma feels her blood run cold as Enzo details their design for a fatal accident. Then, Senora Castellano speaks up, her voice sharp as ice. This high society wedding is a meticulously crafted snare. The lesson here is brutal but undeniable. When you step into a viper's nest, your enemies will weaponize your innocence, framing a simple nurse and a powerful boss with the exact same merciless cruelty. They could spin any twisted lie to the press. A jealous lover, a robbery gone wrong, anything to wash their hands of the blood. Dante looks Emma in the eyes, carrying the weight of the underworld in his gaze. If they walk into that wedding, he warns, the enemy will take his life and bury her right next to him. Most people would shatter, but Emma simply suggests they cancel. Dante is a different breed of survivor. He flashes a terrifying, razor-sharp smile. They are going, he whispers, but they will hijack the trap. Marco asks for the strategy, and Dante lays it out with chilling precision. The lesson here is profound. Never run from a snare when you can turn it into your own weapon. The second he steps into that cathedral, his team will leak every piece of dirty evidence to the news. Emma sits paralyzed by the scale of his ambition. Dante states with deadpan calm that he will bury a corrupt senator and a major mob boss in a single afternoon. This elegant wedding will become a political funeral, marking the end of the Bianchi bloodline. Enzo shifts nervously, warning, this is a declaration of all-out war. Federal agents will swarm, and rival crews will howl for blood. Dante simply nods. He knows the agonizing risks, but he is doing this for Emma. She refuses to let him burn down his empire just to avenge her. It teaches us a profound truth. True love means protecting someone from their own representations. Dante slowly rises, walking around the heavy oak table until he stands just inches away from her, the room with thick unemotion. Dante lowers his voice, the sound vibrating through the quiet room. He insists this is no noble sacrifice. He has waited 2 agonizing years for this move. Ever since her hand saved his life, he knew he could no longer survive as a ruthless monster. She gave him a reason to seek redemption. The room falls into a breathless silence before the hardened boss returns. They have 6 days. He vows that on Saturday, Emma will not enter into that church as a victim. She will walk in as a queen, ready to reshape the city underworld. The lesson here is beautiful. The right person can completely rewrite your destiny. Later that night, at 1 a.m, Emma lies awake, drowning in her racing thoughts. She quietly slips out of bed to wander the dark halls of the luxury penthouse. The living room is swallowed by shadows, illuminated by the Manhattan skyline. Out on the freezing terrace, Dante leans against the iron railing in a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. He smoking cigars, a rare habit betraying the crushing weight on his shoulders. Emma slides the glass door open, stepping into the biting chill. The city hums below like a sleeping giant. She softly asks if he is struggling to rest. He murmurs that sleep really comes. The wind tangles her hair as she asks the heavy question. Is he truly afraid of what awaits them? Dante turns his dark eyes to her and simply says, yes, no hollow bravado, just naked, raw honesty. The lesson here is vital. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the quiet willingness to admit you are terrified. Emma braced herself for Dante to raise his mob boss armor. Instead, he dismantles it entirely. He is not afraid of rival gangs or federal cages. He is terrified of failing her. He is haunted by the dread that during the upcoming violence, she will finally look at him and see only a monster. Emma steps closer, asking how he thinks she sees him right now. Dante looks down, his voice thick with emotion. She looks at him like he is actually worth saving, he whispers. That is the beautiful life lesson here. Sometimes it takes another soul believing in your light before you can stop living in the dark. A freezing wind cuts across the terrace. Emma shivers, and instantly, this ruthless enforcer wraps his warmth around her shoulders, keeping the bitter cold away. The silk lining radiating his heat feels like a protective embrace against the Manhattan chill. Then, Dante shatters the night with an unbelievable confession. You and I must look at the weight of this moment. 2 years ago, waking up in that hospital as a broken ghost, he saw Emma before anyone else knew he was alive. She was holding his hand, begging him to stay because the world had lost too many good souls. Emma tries to deny it, but Dante remembers every tearful syllable. When she left the room, he hid his mother's ring beneath her chair cushion. He wanted to leave a fragment of his soul with the angel who saved him. The lesson here is profound. The quiet sacrifices we leave behind for others are the very things that end up saving us. He knew that ring would become her ultimate lifeline. Picture the raw emotion bleeding into this midnight scene. Emma looks deeply into Dante's tired eyes, her voice shaking but certain, promising him she is not running away. Dante spent 2 agonizing years in the shadows, but admits he never stopped the brave nurse who called him handsome while he bled out on a gurney. That kind of profound loyalty is rare in this broken world. Tears spill down Emma's cheeks as a soft laugh escapes her lips. She finally lifts her hand to touch his scarred face. The ruthless crime boss leans into her palm, whispering that he is never leaving her side again. The lesson here is written in stone. Real love stays anchored even when the countdown to war begins. You do not simply walk away from a powerful connection forged in pure agonizing fire. Dante closes his eyes, melting into her touch, yet guilt forces him to issue a final warning. He is a syndicate boss with unforgivable blood staining his hands. Emma does not flinch. She reveals she read his medical file 2 years ago. She knows this terrifying enforcer willingly took 3 heavy bullets to the chest to shield an innocent child from crossfire. Dante freezes, staring at her as if she is the only piece of salvation left in his ruined universe. Overcome by her acceptance, he pull her in for a kiss brewing for 2 long years. It is slow, desperate, and heartbreakingly real. He is finally breathing again. The lesson for us tonight? Never judge a soul by the shadows they cast, because sometimes the based parts' reputations hide the most fiercely protective hearts. When they finally break apart, Dante rests his heavy forehead against hers. His voice, reduced to a rough whisper, carries the ultimate surrender of a dangerous man. He confesses his freedom is gone, his life now belonging entirely to her. Emma nods through her tears, choosing to step into the darkness by his side. Fast forwarded to day 14, the agonizing final countdown. Emma wakes to the steady drum of his heartbeat. They have shared this bed, yet Dante remains a steadfast protector, never crossing boundaries, bound by an absolute reverence for her. He gently traces her hair, murmuring that today is the day the world changes. You and I can find a profound lesson in this quiet morning. True power is never found in taking what you desire by force, but in possessing the absolute restraint to deeply honor the person you love. Emma confesses in a quiet whisper that the day ahead terrifies her. Dante acts as her steady anchor, promising he will remain by her side when those cathedral doors swing open. By 9 o'clock, the styling team arrives, turning the morning into a blur of intense preparation. 3 hours later, Emma stares into the mirror at a stranger. The quiet nurse from 3 weeks ago has vanished, replaced by the undisputed queen of the underworld. Her hair is sculpted perfectly, her eyes sharp, and her lips painted a dangerous wine red to match her stunning gown. The life lesson here is timeless. When you prepare to walk into the lion den, you must put on your absolute best armor. A deeply rooted, quiet confidence will always be the sharpest weapon you can carry into the hardest battles. There is nothing flashy about her gown. It simply radiates a cold, untouchable power. As Emma slowly descends the sweeping staircase, Dante waits below, looking dangerously sharp in a tailored black tuxedo. For a man who effortlessly commands every room, he is rendered completely speechless. He simply stares, captivated by her transformation into genuine underworld royalty. Breaking the quiet tension, he produces a weathered vintage leather box. Inside rests a heavy, breathtaking diamond necklace, a treasured relic that once belonged to his late mother. He whispers that she must wear it today, marking her official entry into his blood-stained world. The lesson here is deeply symbolic. When you step up to face the wolves, carry the legacy of the people who truly love you, and wear their bright memory as an unbreakable shield. Dante fastens the heavy diamond chain around her neck, his fingers tracing her spine before he steps back to admire his queen. The house manager scans Emma's powerful silhouette, offering a slow, respectful nod. Her final words echo through the quiet foyer. Remember, you are not attending a wedding today. You are marching into war. That heavy truth lingers as they slide into a black, luxury sedan, cutting through the city traffic like a razor. Dante quietly reviews his master plan. His men have already primed an explosive dossier for the major news networks, set to drop the devastating truth at exactly 3 o'clock. Let us take away a vital lesson from this moment. Never declare war on your worst demons unless your strategy is flawlessly executed and completely without mercy. The snare is finally pulled tight. Federal agents idle in unmarked cars 2 blocks from the cathedral, while hungry reporters wait to rip a corrupt senator to pieces. Even that slippery fixer rushing to the airport will find Dante's men waiting on the tarmac. Nobody breathes on this island today without Dante giving permission. As he stares out the tinted glass at the cold city that once chewed Emma up, his voice a low rumble. The man who broke her is finally hers. We're going to watch this psychological game play out together. Ava simply grips his hand, whispering she only wants her ex, and asks to see the ghost of the woman he carelessly threw away. The undeniable truth of the night. The sharpest revenge is simply outgrowing the people who could never see your real worth. Dante traces the back of her hand, a silent promise that the battle is already won. The heavy car crawls to a stop at the cathedral steps. Outside, the night is alive with a frantic crowd. It is the social event of the season, and the ruthless press can smell blood in the water. Dante steps into the cold air, a man carved from absolute power, guiding Emma right into a storm of blinding camera flashes. Reporters scream his name, begging to know why the city's most feared phantom is attending a politician's wedding. He gives them nothing. He just offers a chilling smile as he presents Emma his arm. Take a note here, my friends. A true king never wastes his breath explaining his moves to the street. In a world full of noise, absolute silence will always be the loudest sound of all. They begin the slow ascent up the ancient stone steps. Emma is a vision of cold, heartbreaking confidence, moving exactly the way Dante taught her. Her chin is high, her shoulders are back, her eyes are fixed straight ahead, blind to the frantic flashing lights. She glides as though she owns the concrete beneath her heels. Suddenly, a panicked voice from the mob rips through the static, screaming her name. They realize the discarded girl is walking arm in arm with the untouchable Dante Russo. Emma barely reacts, offering just the faintest curve of her lips. The match is struck. The lesson here is beautifully simple. Keep your chin, because the moment you finally realize your true worth, the world has no choice but to step aside. The arched doors close behind them, sealing them inside a cathedral that smells of melting wax, expensive incense, and old money. In an instant, the low hum of 200 wealthy day guests drops into a terrified silence. Every face turns toward the entrance. Pay close attention to this shift, because this is the exact moment the grand illusion shatters. Up near the altar, the corrupt senator freezes mid-laugh. You can see the color drain out of his face as his eyes lock onto Dante. His wife is so stunned her glass tips, spilling champagne all over her pearls without her even blinking. At the altar, the foolish boy who broke Emma stands there completely clueless to the disaster. Life is funny that way. Karma never politely knocks on the front door. It simply kicks it entirely off the hinges. Harrison shifts his gaze to the back of the church. The second his eyes find Emma, he stops breathing. His shoulders lock up, his hands fall limp. The bride is nowhere to be seen, but a cold sweat is pooling at his collar. With quiet authority, Dante guides Emma down the velvet runner. His is every step is a calculated strike, bringing her right to the fifth row. It is close enough to horn Harrison for the entire ceremony, but far enough back to maintain their cold inf superiority. They take the seats like a king and queen returning from exile. An elderly socialite next to them is trembling, whispering her name in total disbelief. Never forget this profound truth. Sometimes, simply walking into a room as a healed person is enough to completely break the one who tried to ruin you. Emma turns to the shaking woman with a sweet smile, casually adding that the terrifying man beside her is simply her date. The woman swallows hard, rendered totally speechless. The heavy groan of the church organ echoes and the bride appears. Victoria looks flawless in heavy silk, but her eyes are vacant. She walks like a hollow woman simply marrying a bank vault. Halfway down the aisle, she catches sight of Emma sitting calmly with the city's worst nightmare. Victoria stole, her expensive heel catching on the velvet carpet. Dante offers her a single, chilling nod. She turns as pale as a ghost. Consider the sad truth of this scene. You can never build a steady future when the ugly sins of your past are watching your every move from the fifth row. Emma feels Harrison staring desperately from the altar, but she refuses him even a fraction of her attention. Instead, she turns entirely to Dante, letting her hand rest deliberately on his thigh. It is a quiet, undeniable claim of power. Dante leans in, his voice brushing her ear as he whispers that she outshines every soul in the room. The ceremony stretches on like a slow-motion disaster. Harrison chokes on his vows, his voice cracking into the microphone, while hundreds of guests watch his spirit crumble. In the front row, his corrupt father frantically types on his phone, begging his guards for a lifeline that will never come. This is exactly what we call the great unraveling. Panic is simply the bitter fruit of a guilty conscience, and sooner or later, the bill always comes due. Dante murmurs a dark reassurance. The senator can type until his hands bleed, but his men have chained every exit shut. No one is saving them. The priest finally declares the miserable couple married. Their kiss is hollow, a pure performance for the cameras. The newlyweds march back down the aisle, but at the fifth row, Harrison hits the brakes. He abandons his bride entirely. He stares at Emma, whispering that he never thought she would come. Let us pause right here and look at her reaction. Emma meets his broken gaze with eyes made of pure frost. There is no anger left, just a polite, devastating congratulations on his empty union. The final lesson runs deep. True peace is finally looking your painful past right in the eye and feeling absolutely nothing at all. Picture the suffocating atmosphere in that room. You and I have seen this archetype before, the broken man clinging to what he discarded. Victoria hisses, desperate to drag Harrison away, but he remains frozen, demanding one last word with Emma. It is a fatal miscalculation. Dante rises from the pew. His movement is so controlled yet laced with absolute menace that the room falls dead silent. He looms over the shattered groom, stating that Harrison no longer holds the right to speak her name. The gasp of the elite bounces off the stone. As Victoria hauls his lifeless weight away, we are reminded of a quiet truth. If you leave something precious out in the cold, do not be surprised when a stronger force claims it. Emma sits perfectly still, absorbing the terrifying gravity of his protection. The scene shifts to a ballroom bleeding with obscene wealth. Chandeliers hang like glass cages, illuminating a wall of white roses spelling out the names of a doomed couple. When the brass doors swing open, Emma and Dante do not enter as guests. They step inside like conquerors, surveying a fresh battlefield. The soft jazz evaporates. Every diamond draped neck snaps in their direction. Some eyes widen with raw terror, while others eagerly drink in the spectacle. The grand clock ticks heavily toward 2:45, and the air turns incredibly thick. Remember this simple reality. You can throw an endless fortune at a decaying romance, but cold cash cannot buy peace when the devil is on your guest list. The countdown to their utter ruin is finally underway. We are 15 minutes away from the illusions shattering across every green screen. Dante flips a phone from his pocket, sends a single command to the shadows, and slides it back. Right on cue, Senator Whitmore slithers over. He wears the whole smile as of a arbitrary politician, but the cold sweat on his brow betrays his panic. He pretends to be shocked to see a crime boss. Dante meets him with a smile so cold it could freeze blood, stating he only came for Emma, the treasure the senator's son left in the dirt. The old man's face flushes with pure humiliation. Let this be a lesson to all of us. Power is often just a fragile mask. Sooner or later, the skeletons you buried in the dark will claw their way to the surface and demand their heavy toll. Whitmore stammers, trying to laugh away the tension, but Dante cuts him down with quiet violence. Then he drops the match. He casually mentions the senator's hidden meetings in this hotel with Salvatore Bianchi, a rival phantom of the underworld. The color instantly drains from the old man's cheeks. He tries to deny it, his voice shaking, but Dante tilts his head, asking why he is trembling if his conscience is clean. It is devastating. The exact second the clock strikes 3, every phone in the massive ballroom erupts. A chorus of alerts drowns out the string quartet. A woman cries out in shock, demanding someone turn on the screens. Take this to heart. Every dirty secret has a ticking clock, and darkest lies will always surrender to the light. Let's look at the mechanics of this downfall. Over by the marble bar, screen had been looping guest arrivals. Without warning, a blood-red news banner slashes across the glass. It is a brutal unmasking. The anchor announces the senator's financial ties to a violent crime ring. Surveillance photos flash showing Golden Boy Harrison shaking hands with a known killer. The anchor's grim voice cuts over the frozen detailing a $20 million bribe paid for political blood. It is a flawless execution of a corrupt dynasty. We are watching an empire burn to ash. If you build your life on a foundation of rotten, dirty money, the floor will always fall out from under you. The Whitmore legacy is dying live on air, right in front of the society they desperately wanted to rule. Listen to the suffocating quiet of a massive lie breaking apart. Patricia's screams shatter at first, a raw sound of pure denial. Harrison scrambles across the polished floor, begging his father for answers, while the senator just stares blankly at Dante. You can see the exact second the older man's world completely crumbles. Dante doesn't even blink. He taps a screen, and suddenly Harrison's own voice echoes through the hall, begging a mob boss for a hit in exchange for cash. 200 camera lenses capture a golden boy dropping to his knees, utterly broken. We all have to remember this simple truth. The dark company you choose to keep in the shadows will always drag you down when the lights come on. Do not sit at the devil's table if you are not prepared to pay the price. The cycle of consequence doesn't stop there. The oak doors swing wide, and federal agents marches inside, their stark jackets cutting through the sea of expensive silk. The charges ring out like gunshots: bribery, conspiracy, fraud. Absolute chaos takes over. Victoria collapses, her $100,000 gown pooling around her on the floor. dark tears ruining her face. Her superficial dream has dissolved into a real nightmare. Through this madness, Dante places a gentle hand on Emma's back, guiding her toward the exit. Their work here is done. Harrison feels the cold bite of steel cuffs on his wrists, forced to watch the one pure thing he ever had walk away forever. It goes to show that chasing one's hollow status instead of genuine affection leaves you entirely alone. The moral debt always comes due. Harrison is frantic now, his voice cracking as he screams across the room that he loves her. And surprisingly, Emma stops. The silence in that shattered ballroom is deafening. Notice how she doesn't scream back. She doesn't have to, because quiet confidence always drowns out loud desperation. She looks at the hollow shell of the man she once knew, telling him softly that he never loved her. He just couldn't handle the ego blow of losing his prize. Then she slips her arm through Dante's and walks out of the ruins with her head held high. Cameras flash in the freezing night air. Dante flashes a cold smile. Let this be your reminder to hold tightly onto the good people who stand by your side. Once a loyal heart decides it has had enough, it closes its doors forever. Once the heavy car doors slam shut, cutting off the flashing lights, the adrenaline vanishes. Emma begins to shake, her hands trembling as the sheer weight of what they just pulled off settles in her bones. Dante reaches over, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles, a quiet promise that the storm is over. The Whitmore name is already ashes, but the night still has teeth. Dante checks his phone, a grim satisfaction crossing his eyes. Bianchi tried to slip away on a private jet, but Dante's men were waiting on the tarmac. Hearing this, Emma exhales a breath that feels like it has been trapped in her chest for years. Courage isn't the absence of fear, my friends. Courage is walking straight through the flames, even when your hands are shaking, knowing there is safety on the other side. Let's step inside that quiet penthouse together. Emma kicks off her heels the second. The lock clicks, leaning back as Dante pours a dark, aged whiskey. He hands her the glass and pulls her close on the velvet couch. She feels victorious, but Dante's eyes remain heavy with the burdens of his world. He tells her the war isn't over. Bianchi has a sprawling family, and they won't let this insult simply fade into the night. Then, he finally tells her the truth about the blood on the floor 2 years ago. That bullet Emma saved him from? It was fired by Bianchi's men, all because Dante refused to let them buy the city's politics. Our past choices are the bricks that build our future, and in a world run by shadows and power plays, choosing to keep your soul clean will always make you a target. The air between them grows incredibly thick. Dante Costantinez that, if his heart had stopped that night, his organization would have bled out alongside him. By pressing her hands to his wound, Emma didn't just save one man, she sheltered hundreds of families who depended on his quiet empire. Emma sits there speechless, the magnitude of her compassion washing over her. Dante looks at her with an intensity that could burn the city, whispering his debt is paid, but he found something far greater, his salvation. They pull together into a desperate, grounding kiss, shedding the terror of the past week. It is a beautiful reminder that a single act of blind kindness can ripple out, returning to us as love. But in this brutal life, peace is a fragile thing, easily broken by a ringing phone. Just light up on the glass table. The second Dante puts the phone to his ear, the warmth leaves his body. His jaw locks. The cold, calculating boss returns in a flash. He lowers the phone, and the dread in his eyes makes Emma's stomach turn. The man the enforcers grabbed on the tarmac was a decoy. The real Bianchi slipped through their fingers and vanished. Even worse, Dante's trap just sent Bianchi's sister straight jail cell In one afternoon, the monster lost his empire and his bloodline. Now, he has nothing left but a craving for revenge, and he is coming for them. The harsh reality of dealing with demons is this: if you aim for the crown, you had better finish the job. A wounded predator is always far more vicious than one who rests easy. You and I can feel the heavy chill seeping into the room the moment Emma asks who the real target is. Dante offers no soft landing. He meets her eyes and drops a single, devastating word: you. Bianchi understands the architecture of ruin. He knows exactly where to slide the blade. Dante instantly hardens into a mob boss, his voice turning to cold iron. He orders armed men at every exit and tactical teams for his family. Emma pulls her knees to her chest on that velvet sofa, trembling. She had faced down corrupt men before, but this violence is a totally different beast. We all learn this eventually. When you hand someone your whole heart, you give them the power to save you, but you also expose the most fragile part of your soul. Dante pulls her trembling body against his chest, making a promise that sounds more like a threat to the gods. He whispers that if anyone even grazes her shadow, he will burn the city down until the ash chokes the sky. It is a terrifying kind of devotion. Sleep does not come. Emma lies awake in the dark, tracking the heavy thud of boots in the hallway. At 3 in the morning, she drifts toward the window. Down in the glow of the streetlights, 3 black trucks sit idling. The old scandals she fought were just child's play compared to the monsters at her door. Now, it is a hard truth we all have to face at some point. Walking away from a bad situation does not guarantee peace. Sometimes, closing one terrible door only leaves you standing directly in the path of a hurricane. For 3 agonizing days, the silence inside that penthouse stretches tight enough to snap. Emma's face is plastered across every local news station. By the 4th morning, the safety of her golden cage starts to suffocate her. She plants her feet and tells him plainly that she is going back to her hospital shift. Dante tries to block her, but she shuts him down. She warns him that hiding means the men in the shadows have already won. There is a deep lesson here for all of us. You can never let the fear of what might happen steal the actual life you are living. Dante caves, but he quietly surrounds the hospital with his best gunmen. Then, right at 11 in the morning, the trap snaps shut. A brutal crash floods the emergency room with chaos, and the snare is set. The emergency room instantly becomes a war zone of screaming heart monitors and frantic nurses. The sharp smell of fresh blood hangs thick in the air. In the madness, a stranger in green scrubs taps Emma's shoulder. He says, "A patient in room 412 is crashing." That is the exact bed where she saved Dante's life 2 years ago. The memory hits her like a physical blow, sending her into a blind sprint. Panic always blinds us to the obvious traps. She never stops to ask why a random stranger knew her name. She throws the door open, but the bed is totally empty. Before she can turn, a gloved hand clamps over her mouth, pressing a sour chemical rag to her face. It shows us a brutal reality. The people who want to break us will almost always use our deepest compassion as the weapon to drag us down. The hospitalites blur into a terrified void. Miles away, inside the quiet of his private club, Dante takes the call. Luca, a man built like a stone wall, sounds completely shattered as he admits they lost her. Dante drops into his leather chair, the air ripped right out of his chest. Then his phone lights up. When he answers, the voicing for him is smooth and sickeningly calm. It is Bianchi, the ghost. Dante drops his voice into a gravelly threat, promising a slow end if she is hurt. Bianchi just laughs with a dry, empty rattle. He whispers that she is already his, and she looks beautiful. Keep this truth close to your chest. The most dangerous evil rarely yells. It speaks you softly from the darkest shadows. The phone line crackles softly, carrying the poison of Bianchi's dry laugh. He openly mocks the poetry of it all. The sweet nurse who saved the boss is now just a pawn on a bloody board.
His demands leave no room to breathe. A warehouse in Red Hook, 4 in the morning. Come alone.
Or Emma becomes a gruesome warning.
Dante's blood turns to Freon.
He barks at Marco to gather the shooters, brushing off the warning that it is a suicide mission. But that is what love does it not? It makes us blind to the cliff right in front of our feet. Just as the shouting peaks, the heavy orphanage doors swing open. His mother, Senora Castellana, steps into the room. Wrapped in black, she looks exactly like a woman who has spent her entire life preparing for the end of the world. Let us pull this apart together, because this is where the real tragedy lies. The Senora's voice is absolute ice as she tells her son to stop acting like a heartbroken boy and start thinking like a king. If Emma dies, Dante lives to burn the city down. If Dante dies, 200 families are thrown to the wolves. It is a horrible truth about leadership. True responsibility often requires us to make the coldest, most inhuman choices imaginable. But Dante can only see Emma pressing her hands to his bleeding chest. He refuses to let her die in the dark. Yet he is not walking in blind. Within an hour, they sketch out a brutal tactical web. Dante will walk through the front doors as bait. Meanwhile, Enzo is on a burner phone, quietly handing the address to the feds to spring a hidden trap. The feds have been hunting Bianchi like a ghost for months, and this anonymous tip is the miracle they needed. By 3:30, silent black vans slide through the dead streets of Brooklyn. Miles ahead of them, Emma finally jolts awake into a living nightmare. A single yellow bulb swings over her. Her wrists bite into cold metal restraints. A heavy iron door groans, and Salvatore Bianchi steps into the pale light. He looks like an ordinary grandfather, except for the dead eyes of a man with no soul left to lose. He rips the tape off her mouth, whispering that no one can hear her scream in this tomb. It is a chilling reminder for all of us. The most terrifying monsters in this world do not have claws or fangs. They wear suits, and they breathe the exact same air we do. Bianchi leans close, bragging that they are entirely wiped off the map. Emma fights the tremor in her voice, warning him that Dante will tear him apart. But here is the twisted psychology of a mob war. Bianchi does not just want to in the ground, wants to break his spirit to make the proud boss beg on his knees while Emma pays the price. But Emma is done playing the victim. She forces her breathing to steady, scanning the shadows. 6 men with rifles, 1 exit. Dante once told her that when panic hits, you find a weapon. Life constantly backs us into corners, but fear only blinds us to the tools lying right at our feet. Her eyes trace the dusty floor and lock onto a jagged shaft of a broken whiskey bottle. Her silent rebellion has officially started. Moving millimeter by agonizing millimeter, Emma drags the sharp glass up between her boots. Then, a deep vibration rattles the concrete. Heavy engines. Right at 4 o'clock, the loading doors screech open. Dante strides into the harsh light with Marco right on his heels. No heavy coats, no visible weapons. It takes a terrifying kind of clarity to walk straight into your own execution just to save someone else. Bianchi throws his hands up, laughing like a proud uncle. Dante's expression is carved from granite. He demands Bianchi take his blood and let the girl walk. But the old man wants to play, dragging a rough finger across Emma's shoulder. Real bravery is looking the devil in the eye and refusing to flinch. Emma sits like a statue, locking eyes with Dante, and does not shed a single tear. The fake smile vanishes, and Bianchi completely shatters. He screams with a raw, ugly hatred, spitting about how Dante wiped out his entire empire in a single afternoon. He jams the cold barrel of his gun against Emma's temple, demanding Dante choose who bleeds first. Dante does not even blink. His voice is a flat, freezing whisper when he tells Bianchi to check the window. The old man peers outside, and his face falls. The warehouse is drowned in the blinding headlights of Russo soldiers. Still, Bianchi sneers, claiming he will drop them both before the door breaches. Arrogance is the poison that ruins us all. Dante simply nods, agreeing that he probably could, but suggests he look at the ceiling first. Bianchi glances up. 2 glowing red lasers are resting directly over his own heart. Stick with me here, because this is where the board flips entirely. Those red beams belong to federal snipers nested in the high rafters. Dante casually lets it slip that the feds own the building now, giving the old man exactly 5 seconds to drop the gun. But a trapped animal only knows how to bite. Bianchi completely snaps. He roars, blindly firing his weapon at Dante. Dante and Marco dive behind rusted shipping crates as lead tears the concrete apart. Seconds later, the feds open fire, and the warehouse turns into a deafening symphony of shattered stone and muzzle flashes. But here is the lesson in the chaos. When everyone is focused on the loud, destructive noise, the quiet work finally gets done. Unnoticed in the storm, Emma furiously saws the glass into her restraints until the plastic finally snaps. We often analyze the cycle of violence as a trap, but in this moment it becomes a literal barrier. Emma throws herself onto the freezing concrete, scrambling behind a shattered pallet while the air cracks apart. Across the crossfire, Dante screams her name, begging her to close a 10-meter gap that might as well be an ocean. Bullets shred the air above her, showering her in splinters. But as she drags herself through this chaos, she spots a shadow creeping into Dante's blind spot. Without hesitation, she launches her body into the gunman, knocking his aim just enough so the bullet screams harmlessly of a steel beam. It is a profound reminder for all of us. Sometimes, surviving our darkest trials requires us to dive headfirst into the very dirt we are desperately trying to escape. The heavy rifle clatters to the floor, and the mobster lunges. But desperation changes our biology, making Emma much faster. We know her hands were trained to heal wounds, never to inflict harm. Yet when love is threatened by death, a primal instinct takes the wheel. Without a single tremble, she scoops up the cold metal, awkwardly jams the stock into her shoulder, and fires. The violent recoil nearly throws her to the ground, but the round tears through the attacker, dropping him instantly. Dante reaches her a second later, dragging her to safety, his face pale with terror as he questions what she just did. Gasping for breath against his coat, he whispers that she saved his life. It shows us a tough truth. We will always break our own moral rules to protect the people we truly love. Dante lets out a fractured laugh, pressing his forehead against hers in a fleeting moment of relief. But the architect of this misery is not finished. Out in the open, Bianchi loses his mind. He screams Dante's name, raises his weapon, and aims squarely at Emma. Without hesitation, Dante throws his entire body over hers, becoming a human shield. This is the tragic poetry of their bond, offering your own heartbeat so another can keep theirs.
Yet the fatal shot never arrives. A sniper round from the rafters rips through Bianchi's shoulder.
He collapses to his knees, howling as his weapon drops. Federal agents immediately flood the warehouse with blinding lights, dragging the broken boss into the cold. The lesson here is inexorable. The violence we eagerly create will eventually come back to dismantle us. With the shadow of death finally lifted, Dante pulls Emma against the freezing concrete. He crushes her to his chest so fiercely she can feel his erratic heartbeat. As he frantically checks her for wounds, she sits perfectly still, whispering in shock that she actually fired a weapon at a person. Dante gently catches her face, reminding her that she acts as his shield and the man will live. We often let fear convince us we are weak, but Emma's choice proves we hold immense strength hidden beneath our terror. They sit intertwined among the shattered glass and gun smoke until the agents guide them out. Stepping into the morning air, a beautiful golden sunrise bleeds over the jagged city skyline. It is a quiet reminder that no matter how terrifying the dark gets, the morning light always finds a way to return. Let us examine what true sanctuary looks like. The Zlipsiksvogstivid and the deepening echo of gunfire is replaced by the slow, calming rhythm of Atlantic waves. Dante has pulled Emma far away from the blood-soaked streets, moving her to a weathered stone mansion wrapped in thick ivy. Surrounded by miles of empty coast, Emma is finally learning how to sleep through the night again. In return, Dante makes the ultimate sacrifice. He officially steps down as the ruling boss, handing his heavy, blood-soaked crown over to Marco. This decision reveals a profound wisdom we all need to understand. Sometimes, the only way to truly win the hardest battles in life is knowing exactly when to walk away from the table, sacrificing your ego and power just to protect the rare moments of peace you have found. We must be clear about this new world. Dante remains the invisible hand, a phantom making the empire shifting moves from the shadows. But the brutal chaos has become Marco's burden. Watching the fallout for their enemies is a cinematic study in total ruin. Salvatore faces 25 years in a federal cell, his legacy crumbling to ash. The corrupt senator was dragged into the blinding light of an impeachment trial, while Victoria fled to hide in London. It proves a universal principle we see over and over again. The toxic energy and pain you intentionally pour into the world will always find a way to flow right back into your own life, ultimately destroying everything you thought you controlled. There is simply no outrunning your own karma. You and I know Emma would never survive as a bird locked inside a gilded cage. She walked right back into her calling, trading the grueling night shifts to become a daytime charge nurse. The true brilliance of her evolution is her new non-profit quietly funded by $5 million routed through a hidden shell company. Tonight, all the wars are paused. She sits on the porch, wrapped in one of Dante's oversized sweaters, letting the warmth of a teacup ground her. Dante sits close beside her, his breast on the wooden rail. She looks at this man who used to burn down cities and softly confesses she never believed she could feel so safe. It reminds us that real healing begins the moment we finally accept peace, instead of constantly looking over our shoulder for the next disaster to strike. Dante stares out at the black ocean, his voice dropping into a heavy truth. He admits that power is a relentless sickness, a poison that seeps into your marrow, but that control was never worth the agonizing risk of losing her. He spent too many sleepless nights terrified of a tragic phone call. Emma leans into his warmth, unraveling a quiet secret of her own. She whispers that her brother has finally let go of his anger because she revealed Dante was the benefactor paying his medical school tuition. Dante turns his head, genuinely unsettled that she saw right through shadow play. Emma just offers a soft, knowing laugh. It is a beautiful lesson in intimacy. We can build massive walls to protect our ego, but we can never hide our true heart from someone who genuinely pays attention to our actions. They sit wrapped in the rhythmic breathing of the tide, letting the silence hold the weight of their trauma. But then the atmosphere shifts. Dante looks at her with a desperate honesty, admitting that while living without her is unbearable, his reality is forever stained by violence. They will always need armored cars and watchers in the dark, dodging nightmares ordinary people never face. Looking deeply into her eyes, he offers her the most painful gift a man like him can give, a clear exit. If she wants a normal life, he will walk away and guard her from the shadows. It highlights a painful but beautiful truth, both about genuine affection. True love is never about trapping someone inside your personal storm. It is about finding the profound emotional courage to leave the door wide open, even when it breaks your own heart. Emma looks at this terrifying man and firmly locks that exit door forever. She reminds the former underworld king that she pulled him back from death twice. They have walked through way too much fire to surrender to fear now. Hearing the unshakable certainties in her voice, the notoriously untouchable Dante Russo actually breaks. Tears gather in his typically cold eyes as he pulls a sleek black box from his coat. Inside rests his mother's platinum ring, reborn with a massive diamond at its center. His voice trembles as he asks if she will finally be his. Through falling tears, Emma nods, and he carefully slips the ring onto her finger. It is a profound reminder of what devotion actually looks like. Real commitment means choosing to stay by their side, even when the world gives you every logical reason to run away. Their quiet kiss under the fading sun becomes a devastating revenge against a harsh world that tried to bury them. Fast forward 6 months, and the Hamptons estate is entirely reborn for their wedding. Picture rows of crisp white linen, the warm glow of hurricane lamps, and a lush garden bleeding into the sand. Yet here is the beautiful irony. For a man who ruled a massive crime syndicate, the guest list stops at exactly 50 people. There are no cameras, no corrupt politicians seeking favors. The only soldiers present are the few who proved their loyalty through actual sacrifice. They get to keep this sacred moment completely hidden from greedy eyes. It perfectly illustrates a lesson many spend decades trying to learn. The ultimate wealth is not loud power or status. It is the quiet luxury of having absolute peace. Stick with me here, because you and I need to really look at the faces in this intimate crowd. Tyler stands tall in a sharp suit, nervously picking at his cuffs. Emma's mother is already weeping softly before the first note of music even plays. In the corner, exhausted emergency room nurses share a deep laugh, blissfully unaware they are drinking wine with Mafia royalty. Marco and Luca anchor the front row, wearing the visible scars like badges of honor. Way in the back, Enzo stands perfectly still.
The protector scanning the tree line, but the most powerful moment happens entirely off scripts. Emma's mother walks right up to the most dangerous man in New York and pulls him into a warm,
trembling embrace. It is a striking reminder that true family is not built on bloodlines. It is built on radical forgiveness. Margaret stares up at this lethal force of nature and weeps, thanking him for loving her broken daughter and bringing the light back into her eyes. Dante Russo closes his eyes, pulling in a breath that looks 20 years deep. For the first time since Hans he watched his own mother fade away, he speaks the word mother into the open air. The raw grief and profound healing wrapped in that single word is enough to break you. Then the music shifts and Emma appears. There are no ridiculous designer labels. She wears a breathtaking ivory dress from a dusty Brooklyn boutique. Tyler walks her forward, his hands shaking with pride until he gives her away. Waiting beneath a massive oak tree is Dante, standing beside an old neighborhood priest, the compare, the most powerful men always hunger for the simplest truths in life. Dante's vows cut through the crashing waves in an unwavering tone. He confesses that Emma resurrected his soul twice, swearing to spend his remaining days earning that impossible grace. He will be her shield, ensuring she never feels invisible again. When Emma speaks, the slight tremble in her voice hardens into steel. She arrived with nothing but a pawned ring and a gamble. He did not just save her from a monster, he pulled Troll from fading into the grey background of life. She promises to truly see the man behind the shadow. They exchange rings, forging an unbreakable pact. It reveals a profound truth we can the greatest strength of the world is simply finding the one rare person who understands your dark and chooses to stay. When they kiss beneath that ancient oak, the small crowd erupts in raw, uncontained joy. Later, under the soft glow of paper lanterns, Tyler raises his glass. His toast cuts straight to the bone. The right partner is never the person with the flawless resume, but the rare soul who plants their feet and fights when the monsters come knocking. A string quartet plays into the night, washing over dancing shadows. Long after the guests fade, Emma and Dante walk alone by the water, her white dress dragging through wet sand. In the quiet dark, he asks if she regrets leaving the old ghosts of her college days behind. The lesson here is quiet but heavy. Truly moving forward often requires us to leave our comfortable phantoms in the past. Emma stops, looking at him with steady eyes, and shakes her head. She tells him every single soul who truly matters was sitting in those chairs tonight. This is a profound lesson you and I need to carry. The moment you figure out what your heart actually needs, you stop bleeding energy for people who never valued you. Looking up at the cold stars, Dante whispers a fragile truth. He wants children, but refuses to let them inherit the bloody underworld that almost consumed him. He wants to teach them the world is cruel, but when the storm hits, family is an unbreakable fortress. Then a small smile breaks his worn face. He promises to teach them to always respect nurses, considering their mother dragged their father out of the grave twice. Emma laughs, resting her tired head against his shoulder, while the black waves break against the shore. Listen to me, my friends. If you and I are on the same frequency today, and this story of healing and psychological resilience struck a nerve, do me a favor and subscribe. Drop a like and send this into the void for someone who needs a reminder about what real loyalty looks like. Emma is no tragic victim waiting for a night. She is living proof that the quiet ones, the ghosts walking past us every day, carry enough inner fire to burn down the darkness. Never write someone off just because they are silent. True wisdom is learning to recognize the sheer, staggering value in someone else long before they ever see it in the mirror. We could all use a little more of that vision. That is the beautiful, painful core of this narrative. This was never a superficial fairy tale about a dark king saving a helpless girl. It is the raw, brutal proof that authentic love does not just puzzle you from the wreckage, it hands you the thought to reclaim your own destiny. Did Emma's climb resonate with your own scars? Have you ever sat at rock bottom, completely unseen by the world, only to find the quiet rage to stand back up? Has someone ever looked at your ruins and seen a palace? Leave your echoes in the comments. We are as a community thinkers out here, and your survivals might be exactly what keeps someone else breathing today. Life is heavy, but shared truth makes the burden lighter. I wish you profound peace. Thank you for walking through the dark with me.